Since their debut in Final Fantasy III, fans around the world have been captivated by summons. They have offered flashy summon sequences, awe-inspiring designs, and of course, incredible damage, all in just a single turn. Well, that's how it started at least. Since Final Fantasy X, it's been much more common for summons to join players on the battlefield as allies. And when that hasn't been the case, their status has been elevated even further, both narratively and through the spectacle of combat. But amongst the pantheon of summons who have been there to aid the party, some have stood out more than others. These summons seemed to break the established confines of the battle systems they operated within, and it's those summons that we're going to be running through in this video. So, with our usual caveat of there being just one entry per game, my name is Daryl, and these are 7 overpowered summons who broke Final Fantasy games. Now, summons are actually the main topic of the discussion in our second book, The Guardians of the Crystal, which is currently going through crowdfunding on Kickstarter. It contains information about the 88 different summonable beings found throughout the main numbered entries, while featuring stunning key art, a foreword from Ben Starr, the voice of Clive Rossfield, and 3 cover variants. After smashing through our initial goal, we are now over 1,000% funded with over 1,000 backers. Unlocking as many stretch goals as we can is now the main focus, and these will not only add free items to all physical orders, but even upgrade the quality of the book with design flourishes. If you'd like to find out more, there's a link in the description below. Now, let's get talking about some overpowered summons. With Final Fantasy VII introducing a whole new graphical style to the franchise, the developers wanted to go big on summons. Throughout the 8-bit and 16-bit era, the summon animations were powerful, but they were still quite basic, with each summon often represented by a static sprite and then some flashy effects to make everything seem rather grand. Final Fantasy VII continued the theme, but turned things up by quite a few notches by introducing fully animated summon sequences that were far more unique than they ever were before, and the most extreme instance of this came via Knights of the Round. Unlike many of the other summon materia, the acquisition of Knights of the Round was made quite complicated, and that was because it was found on Round Island, which was only accessible by using a gold chocobo, which had to be bred. As compensation for this arduous undertaking, players gained access to a summon that was awesome in both spectacle and damage-dealing potential. When called forth, Knights of the Round delivered 13 consecutive strikes of non-elemental damage that ignored magic defense. The damage at the end was then a cumulative total. This meant Knights of the Round was capable of dealing 129,987 points of damage in just a single turn. But it really came to the fore when being combined with other materia. You could, for example, link up with W Summon to cast Knights of the Round 2 times. This allowed for double the damage at double the MP cost, but it also meant double the animation time. Other creative interpretations have paired Knights of the Round with Mime, HP Absorb, Magic Counter, and HP MP Swap. And through manipulations, this means Knights of the Round can actually be cast 7 times in a row, dealing an incredible 909,909 damage without the enemy having a chance to reply. Final Fantasy X saw Aeon's transition from being one-off spectacles that swooped in to deal massive damage to persistent allies that appeared alongside Yuna in place of the party. This meant they no longer had access to just one ability, but could actually use quite a few. And they were even given access to their own overdrive gauges, which were perfect for those who wanted to cheese their way through the game. But Yojimbo then took the notion of cheesing to a whole new level through the use of his Zanmato ability. The acquisition of Yojimbo was quite straightforward in the grand scheme of things. Players had to venture into the Cavern of the Stolen Faith, make their way to the end, then haggle with Yojimbo, with him then only accepting to join Yuna's cause if the appropriate amount of compensation was offered. When summoned, Yojimbo could then perform a few different abilities, but the most important was Zanmato, and this was only performed if Yojimbo was suitably motivated. Zanmato had numerous levels, and the formula for calculating damage was considerable. However, in the most extreme of situations, and if enough gil was paid to Yojimbo, it was possible for Zanmato to defeat every single enemy in the game. In other words, players could use Yojimbo to destroy all of the Dark Aeons, and even Penance if they had enough money to spare, and that feels pretty broken. Final Fantasy XII continued where Final Fantasy X left off, by having summons appear alongside the player during the battle scene. This time, however, because the battle scene was more active, they also had the ability to roam around. The Espers, as they were known, were tiered based on the number of mist gauges needed to summon them. This were Espers such as Ultima and Zodiac placed in the highest tier, but it was a level 2 Esper that had the potential to deal the most damage. Zeromus was associated with the gravity element, and it could be fought and subsequently recruited within a concealed chamber in the Still Shrine of Miriam that only became accessible after defeating Judge Bergen. Though the legwork to obtain Zeromus was on par with plenty of other common side quests, it could become an unexpected force, as its ultimate attack, Big Bang, had the potential to deal considerable amounts of damage. The damage output of Big Bang was calculated by subtracting its current HP from its maximum HP, and then multiplying that value by 5. And this meant its damage output could be manipulated. To score higher numbers, maximizing Zeromus' HP values by reaching level 99 was imperative. Additionally, players could also apply the bubble status, which then doubled the maximum HP. Then, to make full use of this unique damage-dealing ability, Zeromus' HP needed to be reduced to just 1 point, which could be achieved via techniques such as Infuse. By employing these careful tactics, Zeromus' high damage output outclassed even that of Zodiac's Final Eclipse and Shemhazai's Soul Purge. In the original version of the game, this meant Big Bang could deal 64,925 points of damage. But the ceiling was raised in the Zodiac Age because Zodiac's maximum HP was tripled. This then pushed the damage output all the way up to 284,520 points of damage, which was a rather considerable total. In Final Fantasy Type 0, summons were quite special. Due to the game's connection with the Fabula Nova Crystallis mythology, summons were connected with the world and its inhabitants. This meant that when being summoned, there was a significant cost. The player responsible for the summon had to sacrifice their own life to bring forth its mighty power. That power then had numerous forms, as there were a few different classifications of Eidolon and then sub-classifications within those larger groups. Bahamut was considered the strongest main classification, with a few powerful variants accessible to the player, but the most powerful by far was Bahamut Zero. Unlike the other Eidolons, this variant was exclusive to Dr. Eratia, and its appearance in the game was situational. If the party failed to defeat Shinryu Celestia, the Azure Dragonless Sea, at the end of Chapter 5, Bahamut Zero was summoned and then became controllable. It had a few different abilities, but its main one was Mega Flare, which could be charged all the way up to Terra Flare. If used, Terra Flare then broke the damage limit to defeat Shinryu Celestia with relative ease. The HD version of the game could also be modded to allow players to make full use of Bahamut Zero, and its power, when used outside of its planned confines, was pretty ridiculous. Phoenix had appeared in a couple of early Final Fantasy games, but it wasn't until Final Fantasy V that it joined the summonable roster, and its gameplay application was pretty incredible. The summon itself was obtained from the top of the Phoenix Tower after the conclusion of a rather emotional story sequence. When summoned, Phoenix was not that memorable as a damage-dealing entity, as Flames of Rebirth only dealt moderate fire elemental damage to all enemies. Where it came to the fore, though, was instead its broader utility. And this was because alongside that moderate fire elemental damage, Flames of Rebirth could also revive a single fallen ally. But the ally wasn't just revived, they were brought back with full HP and full MP. It made Flames of Rebirth a very powerful ability, and as such, it was denoted as the game's ultimate summon, requiring 99 MP to call forth, which was much higher than the 66 MP required to summon Bahamut. Final Fantasy VIII saw summons integrated with the junction system as Guardian Forces, and this then had a direct impact on stat enhancement and the commands that could be performed by the player characters. But Guardian Forces also had their own HP, which could be used as a buffer for their associated player when being summoned, and they had character affinities that changed their damage output. As such, there was plenty of utility, but their primary role was, of course, dealing damage. And in this regard, none of the Guardian Forces could hold a candle to Eden. Serving as the game's ultimate summon, Eden could be obtained via two methods. It could either be drawn from Ultima Weapon, which could be found within the Deep Sea Research Center, or it could be drawn from Tiamat in Ultimesia's castle at the end of the game. When summoned, Eden then used Eternal Breath to deal huge amounts of non-elemental damage to all opponents, ignoring all enemy spirit stats. But perhaps the most crucial element was that Eternal Breath could break the 9,999 soft damage cap. In its default form, Eternal Breath could therefore deal considerable damage, But should players manage to obtain all the Guardian Force abilities, including Boost, and all the Summon Magic bonuses extending up to the 40% bonus, then Eternal Breath was able to deal up to 60,000 points of damage at maximum boost. And this then made it one of the strongest single-hit moves in the entire game. The only downside was that you'd have to sit through the summon animation, which clocked in at 72.6 seconds. Now, compared to many of the other modern entries, Final Fantasy XV took a very different approach to summons. Astrals were integrated in the story, which wasn't irregular, but how they came to aid Noctis in combat was. Since Final Fantasy X, it had been very common, within the mainline entries at least, for summons to appear as an extension of the party. This saw them have their own health bars, and they often gain access to numerous abilities as a result. Many still had incredible power, but the spectacle was just different from how it was earlier. Final Fantasy XV proposed a return to simpler times, as the developers created an extreme version of the summon sequences that became so popular during the PlayStation 1 era. The only difference was that the player had no control over when and how the Astrals appeared, and this was because of just how broken they were. Astrals often lent their aid when Noctis and his allies found themselves in difficult situations. Titan, for example, was more likely to offer assistance if Noctis' allies were in serious trouble, whereas Leviathan acted if Noctis was struggling and happened to be near a body of water. It made everything very unpredictable. But when summons did appear, they were unlike anything ever seen before in the franchise due to the sheer power they wielded and the sheer size they had in relation to the world they inhabited. Quite often, they would literally evaporate whatever stood before Noctis, and could often be used as huge levelers when fighting against some of the game's more challenging hunts. But with that, they were 7 summons that were so overpowered they could break the games they featured in. How many did you exploit on a regular basis to level the playing field? Please share in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, feel free to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Alright everyone, with that, this is Daryl signing out. As always, I'd like to give a big thank you to all of our Patreon and YouTube membership supporters, especially Benjamin Snow, Chris M. Walker, Christopher Gardner, Clever Chavez, EXP Required on YouTube, Gregory, Nate Dogg, Stephen, and Zukan TDK, who are super special Onion Eye supporters. And of course, a big thank you to everyone for watching this video. I'll see you all again soon for more Final Fantasy goodness.